If you've got a running race coming up, the hardest part is often knowing how to judge what pace you can sustain for that distance. So GTN is here with our top tips on how to pace your next run race.
Now, a well-paced race could be the difference between a good time and a bad time. And I'm not just talking about finish time here, I'm talking about literally having a good time or a bad time.
Yeah, a well-paced race where you cross the finish line having completely exhausted yourself, everything burning and you wanted to stop, but not having run out of energy is a glorious feeling. Contrasting, of course, that awful feeling when you do run out of energy with a few hundred meters, or worse, a few kilometers to go.
Yeah, so how do you pace the race and collapse over that finish line knowing you've given it your all and couldn't have gone any faster? Well, here are some tips.
Tip 1, know your pace. If your goal pace is simply plucked out of thin air, then it's impossible to know whether you're even capable of running that pace for that distance, or maybe capable of running much faster than that pace for that distance. Your goal pace needs to be based on something, either the times you've done in training or maybe your previous personal bests. If it's your first time ever doing this distance, you can use your personal bests from other distances to calculate what time you might be able to run for this new distance. Take your personal best, or your PR for Americans, from a shorter distance and add 5% to your pace for each step up in distance. For example, if your 5 kilometer personal best is 30 minutes, then your 10 kilometer potential personal best is 30 times 2 for the 10 kilometers plus 5%, which will be 63 minutes. However, we wouldn't suggest that you use a 5 kilometer time to estimate your predicted marathon personal best, because that might be far out. Maybe just use it for 1 or 2 steps up in distance. If you don't have a PB, you'll have to use your training paces to guesstimate what time you might run for your race. Be optimistic here though, because races make it a lot easier to push hard than you can in training. Just don't be too optimistic.
Tip 2, do your own thing. Now, it can be easy to get hyped up and over enthusiastic on race day, particularly when you've got hundreds of thousands of people around you. It's amazing how that inner competitor can come out. But it's important you just focus on yourself and you focus on that target goal pace, at least in the first 2/3 of the race. Don't worry about those people that head off really fast. More often than not, they'll come back to you later on, maybe even walking, or they've been running for years and you're not competing with them anyway. The same runs true for your running friends out there. Maybe they've got a little bit carried away, or they're having a bad day, or they've misjudged their pace. Just because you would ordinarily run with them doesn't mean you need to today. Just focus on yourself.
Tip 3, there is no such thing as time in the bank. When you start your goal race, it can feel really easy. You've tapered, you probably had a pre-race caffeine boost, and of course, there's all that adrenaline from the race start. And your goal pace that you set for yourself can feel ridiculously easy. So easy that you cannot justify not going a little bit faster. And you justify this by saying, well, even if it is too fast and I blow up later on, I'll have so much time in the bank that it won't matter and I'll still get my PB. This is a false justification and it won't work. There is no such thing as time in the bank. Anything you overreach in the first half, you'll almost certainly pay back double in the second half. It is highly unlikely that you're going to have some miracle day and blow minutes off your personal best. So be patient, wait for the race pace you have set yourself to build up that fatigue and keep some gas in the tank for the second half.
Tip 4, and the best pacing is even pacing, not even effort. Now, following on from the previous point, the best way to pace a race is obviously to hold the same kilometre and mile splits throughout the entire race, not starting hard and then hanging on for dear life. And this doesn't necessarily mean an even effort. Now, that pace that might have felt easy at the beginning will feel pretty solid by halfway and really quite challenging by the end. So prepare yourself for that challenge and prepare yourself to build your effort as the distance goes on. Now, the hardest part of the race, effort-wise, is usually the third quarter. You've passed the halfway point, but you've still got a significant portion of the race to go. So concentrating on holding your pace here is really important. Now, often if we look at someone's pace chart post-race, it is that third quarter, you'll see a dip in pace and then finishing faster. And avoiding this is a race well-paced.
Tip 5, account for the terrain. While an evenly paced race is the best way to run a PB, this is impossible if the terrain itself is not even. And unfortunately, you'll always lose more on an uphill than you gain on the corresponding downhill. This is why the fastest race courses in the world are always almost completely flat. Now, that doesn't mean you can't run a PB on a hilly run course, of course. It does mean, though, that you need to take this into account when you plan what your goal pace is going to be. You also do need to understand that in the race, you can work a bit harder on the uphills and take a little easier on the downhills, but you can't work so hard on the uphills that you need to walk the downhills, because that's definitely not the way to get a PB.
Tip 6, take into account the conditions. Now, if you wake up on race morning and the weather conditions are anything other than what you have been training in and used to or were expecting, well, you need to factor this in. If it's cooler, add layers. It can be too cold for a singlet and shorts, even in a race. And if it's warmer, well, you may need to actually lower your goal or target pace. No one can run as hard in warmer conditions and drink more. And if it's windier conditions, well, you're going to need to focus more on effort rather than pace. Of course, you'll feel great with a tailwind, but terrible with the headwind, and the headwind's going to take far more than the tailwind gives. So forget about any target times or goal times that you had in mind. And for more humid conditions, well, your sweat won't be able to evaporate as easily as in normal conditions, and therefore you're going to make sure you need to drink more, but also lower your expectations.
Good luck with your next run race. We hope our tips today help you to get to the finish line before you fall apart, but also with absolutely nothing left in the tank. The perfectly paced run race.
Yeah, well, let us know in the comment section down below how close you get to that target time that you had in mind, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. If so, give it a thumbs up, give it a like. See you next time.
Happy running.